Hello there, here we are, back again with the next video about the role of religion in politics, respectively in Israel and in India. Now, there are many different topics to discuss here. I'm just trying to give a general framework. Yes, like it says here, the competing roles and their results. The competing models and their results. What are the competing models of defining the roles of religion in the modern state? So different models here are religious autonomy, or this is what is called in the West, or at least in America, disestablishment. Religious autonomy is what we are familiar with in India and in Israel. Israel got it from the Ottomans. It was called millet, in which in the Ottoman Empire, of course, there were many different ethnic groups, and some were different Christian denominations, different Muslim denominations, there were Jews, etc. So each one had their own. There was, of course, Ottoman law that was partially Islamic based. That applied to everyone, but in their civil law, each religious group had its autonomy, and it had its own religious leader, the Hambashi, etc. But so that was one model of religious autonomy. Of course, India has a different version of that, legally defined, slightly different, called secularism. Yes, in which every religious group has its own religious autonomy. In a limited degree, of course, Indian law, in criminal law or commercial law applies to everyone. But in civil affairs, they have autonomy, and they are defined as a religious group in different ways, different legal status, etc. Disestablishment is what there is in America, where there is complete what is called separation of church and state, in which America has no established religion. There is no official Church of America, as there is an official Church of England, Anglican Church, that is in which the Queen of England is the leader of state. That, of course, is a departure from what there was in classical Europe, in which there was no separation of church and state. It should also be said that separation of church and state comes more naturally to Christianity than to Judaism or Islam, which does not allow for separation of church and state. The question is how Indian religion would define this topic, would define this issue. So another issue is religious legislation, which is a form of majoritarianism. In other words, religious legislation, that would be, for instance, in India, proposing outlawing the sale of beef meat. And it is a form of majoritarianism because it says that there is of course there are minorities, most notably the Muslim minority, who allow the eating of beef. And such legislation would say we don't care if the Muslim minority allows beef, or even on Eid al-Adha they prescribe the eating of beef. It doesn't matter. We are the majority, and therefore Muslims will have to will play by our laws. Now, and of course each religion would have its own proposed religious legislation. In the United States, of course, the religious groups try to ban abortion, or ban or severely restrict abortion. I may say that Jewish law also opposes abortion, but is more lenient on the subject than Christian law. Judaism basically, if I were to make a very complex issue, if I were to make it simple, I would say that Judaism allows abortion in cases where the mother is in danger, and in many and in some cases of for instance, if it is completely clear that the child is to be born with autism, etc. These are controversial issues, so I was just giving a taste of it. Now, and a third. So the first model we had was religious autonomy, in which each group would have its own a measure of legal autonomy, or a disestablishment, in which there is no religious legislation in the country. Those are the first two models. The next model would be religious legislation, in which religious laws are legislated in the national parliament. And the next model, which Israel in Israel has forms of legislation and autonomy. We do not have this establishment. There are religious parties in parliament. But as Judaism is a political religion, as I have explained, it defines many of its goals in political terms, as does Islam. But also in what is more popular, shall we say, in Israel, is religion as a moral compass without legislation. In other words, religion beyond particular legislation of legislating tenets of Jewish or Muslim faith, there is religion as a moral compass. What are the greater goals, the greater moral goals of your state? What ideals does your state represent? Now, in Israel, it should be said that the rabbinate, the chief rabbinate, is under fierce criticism, not only from anti-religious groups. There is internal criticism within the religious community about corruption, about improper, shall we say, improper service, improper measures of service that are, in other words, poor service to the public. There are different critiques. Again, it's internal Israeli politics. I can't really go into it here, but so the rabbinate itself, the established rabbinate, is not particularly popular in Israel. They are not like, so to speak, like a Vatican. Jews do not follow, the vast majority of Jews do not follow their rulings as binding. But what is much more popular is religion as a moral compass. But precisely what this moral compass is disputed among intellectuals. In other words, more left-leaning intellectuals will say that Judaism is more progressive, that it caters more to progressive or socialist tastes, whereas nationalists will say that Judaism is a national religion, and therefore we should align ourselves with nationalist elements around the globe. Modi's India, Orban's Hungary, the Republican Party in America, or even Bolsonaro in Brazil, regardless of his unsuccessful policies during the corona. But and therefore nationalism is important. Other more spiritually oriented elements will say that Judaism has a spiritual path, even a mystical path, and it defines its own interests. Interests differently. Let's say maybe world peace is an objective, or family value. Again, family values. This is something that all religions find as. Most religions, let's say Buddhism, does not define it as important, as the same importance of other religions, but let's say most religions define conservative family values as very important on their list of priorities. If it's Christianity or Judaism or Islam or Hinduism and Hindu denominations, and so they would say that we would like global alliances to protect family values against the decay of the institution of family. And that is the next bullet point I have here: global interfaith alliances. For what causes and how can they work? In other words, this is a theoretical question which has yet to be seen on the international scene. Can people of different faiths align themselves, or different faiths, or even faiths that are at conflict with each other? Can they define themselves as allies to promote conservative values or religious values? Religious values usually, in my opinion, would lean conservative. In most religions, there are of course progressive religions, but I would say that people of more religious inclination, of more religious fervor, tend to lean conservative. And therefore, could people of different religions ally themselves, let's say, in a global fight for family values, or for against abortion, against pornography, against alcoholism, etc.? Again, for instance, alcoholism. Judaism allows the drinking of alcohol. Even there are religious ceremonies in which a cup of wine is drunk. Of course, in Islam, alcohol is strictly forbidden. It is a severe transgression to drink alcohol. Abortion. In Judaism, we are more lenient in abortions than, let's say, Catholic faith. So can alliances like this work? Or would they, how would it look like? Can Hindus, for instance, collaborate with evangelicals, even though we know there is, of course, great animosity towards missionizing work? Could the evangelicals come to a modus vivendi in which they will not missionize, but they will simultaneously collaborate? They will come to a pact of non-missionizing, but collaborating on family values. In other words, could these alliances work on a global scheme? Or is there just too much baggage, too many conflicting interests, and it could not work, and the Jews could not get along with the Muslims, and the Hindus with the evangelicals, etc.? So these are different roles of how politics can work, how politics can influence politics, and we have to discuss these issues because I think they are very deep issues, and they are definitely worth a discussion. So there we have it for now, and then we will go to the next video.